A lunch tray exploded against the floor. Kimchi and rice scattered like shrapnel across pristine tile. Jason Kim froze. His walker kicked from under him, held high like a hunting trophy. "Walk much, cripple," one bully sneered in mock Korean accent. The crowd roared. Phone shot up, red lights burning like predators' eyes. Another shove sent juice cascading down Jason's uniform. "Mafia daddy can't buy you working legs." The chant erupted, vicious and rhythmic. Fight, fight, fight. Some kids howled with laughter, others stared with guilty fascination. Across the cafeteria, near the service entrance where the cleaners ate, Brittany Allison set down her sandwich. 14 years old, calm as stone, watching. The bullies didn't notice her stand. Not yet. And when she did, nothing in that pristine cafeteria, built on money and cruelty, would ever be the same. This is Black Stories, where courage doesn't ask for permission and justice finds its voice in the most unexpected warriors. If you believe that real strength isn't measured by power or privilege, but by who you protect when no one's watching, hit that like button and lean in. Because sometimes the daughter of a maid delivers a lesson that the son of a kingpin, and his father, will never forget. Jason Kim knew fear like a language he never chose to learn. At 10 years old, he had already survived more than most children could imagine. His mother, Min Seo, the gentle woman who sang him Korean lullabies and whispered stories about tigers who became human, was gone. Violence had taken her one terrible night, an attack meant for his father that found the wrong target. The gunmen had waited in the parking garage of their building, faces covered, intent clear. They wanted Harry Kim's empire to crumble. Instead, they took the one thing that held it together. Jason remembered that night in fragments. The sound of his mother's heels clicking as she carried grocery bags. The sudden crack that echoed like thunder in concrete. Her body shielding his in the back seat where she'd just buckled him in. The warmth of her blood seeping through his shirt as she held him close, whispering through failing breath. "Be stronger than your father, Jason," she had said, her Korean accent thickening as life drained away. "Choose protection, not revenge. Promise me. Promise." Her hand had trembled against his cheek. "The world will try to make you hard like him. Don't let it. Stay soft where it counts." Then silence. Then sirens. Then Harry's roar of grief that shook the parking structure like an earthquake. The men responsible disappeared within 48 hours. Harry made sure of that. But revenge didn't bring Minnesio back. It didn't fill the hole in their penthouse or the one in Jason's chest that grew wider every day. And it certainly didn't change the fact that Jason had been born with cerebral palsy, a condition that affected his legs and balance. He moved with a walker, each step deliberate and measured. In Harry's world, a world of speed, power, and dominance, Jason's disability was seen as weakness. Not by Harry directly, who never said the words aloud, but by the men who worked for him. By the families who owed him favors. By the enemy's children who attended the same elite school. What good is a kingpin who can't even fix his own kid? The whisper had reached Jason's ears more than once, passed through hallways like currency. It stung worse than any physical blow because part of him wondered if it was true. His father commanded an empire built on fear and respect. He could make problems disappear with a phone call. He could move millions of dollars with a signature. But he couldn't make Jason's legs work the way other kids' legs worked. Bayside Academy was supposed to be safe. Harry had paid a fortune for Jason's spot, not that tuition was the issue, but the security considerations were. 2 bodyguards waited in an SUV outside the school gates every day. Another sat in the administrative building, disguised as a consultant. Harry's reputation created a bubble around Jason, but it was the wrong kind of protection. It kept physical threats away. It didn't stop the whispers. It didn't stop the pointing. It didn't stop the way other kids treated him like a museum exhibit, something to observe from a distance, to discuss in hushed tones, but never to approach with genuine friendship. Crippled Prince, they called him. Mafia baby. The worst were the children of people who owed Harry money or favors. They couldn't touch Harry directly, so they aimed their resentment at Jason instead, sharpening their cruelty into words designed to cut. At first, Jason had tried to fight back. He'd reported incidents to teachers, who handled them with uncomfortable efficiency, too afraid of Harry's reputation to be fair, too aware of optics to ignore them entirely. The bullies would get token punishments, then return with sharper edges and quieter methods. So Jason learned what every child of dangerous men learns eventually: suffering in silence is safer than asking for help. Harry tried, in his way. After Minacio's death, he attempted to be present. He showed up to parent-teacher conferences with an entourage that made administrators nervous. He asked Jason about his day in gruff, monosyllabic exchanges that felt like business negotiations. "School okay?" "Yeah." "Anyone bothering you?" "No." The lie tasted like ash, but Jason swallowed it anyway because the truth would unleash something he couldn't control. Because Harry didn't speak in comfort or understanding. He spoke in threats and territories. If Jason admitted to being bullied, Harry would solve it the only way he knew how, with fear and consequences that would make Jason's isolation even worse. The other kids already treated him like a grenade with the pin pulled. Imagine what they'd do if their parents received late-night visits from Harry's associates. So Jason shrank. He mastered the art of disappearing in plain sight. He ate lunch alone at a corner table, his walker folded beside him, earbuds in even when no music played. He kept his eyes on the ground during passing periods, tracking the scuffed tile patterns like a map to safety. He perfected the blank expression that gave bullies nothing to feed on: no tears, no anger, just hollow compliance. At home, in the penthouse that felt more like a mausoleum than a residence, Jason would sit by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city and remember his mother's words. "The stars don't care how fast you walk, Jason. They shine for you anyway." Minacio had loved astronomy. She'd told him stories about constellations, about how light traveled across impossible distances just to reach Earth. "You're like that," she'd said. "Your light reaches people even when you think you're too far away to matter." But Jason didn't feel like light. He felt like a shadow in his own life, a disappointment to a father who needed an heir worthy of an empire, a target for enemies who couldn't reach the real threat, a burden to bodyguards who had to accommodate his slower pace. He was 10 years old, and he'd already learned what it meant to carry grief he couldn't speak, to navigate a world that saw his disability before his humanity, to live in the fortress of his father's protection while being utterly, completely alone. His mother's dying wish echoed in his mind every day: choose protection, not revenge. Stay soft where it counts. But how could he stay soft when the world demanded he harden just to survive each day? Jason didn't know the answer. So he did what he'd learned to do best. He stayed quiet. He stayed small. He carried his mother's words like a shield even as his body trembled under the weight of a cruelty that money and power could never quite stop. Brittany Allison was no stranger to being invisible. At 14, she had already mastered the art of moving through spaces without disturbing them, of existing in the margins where people's eyes slid past without recognition. It was a survival skill she'd learned young, honed by necessity and reinforced by her mother's constant warning: don't draw attention. We need this job. Her father, Master Frankie Allison, had been different. He'd taught her to command space, not shrink from it. Frankie had been a decorated army sergeant, the kind of man who walked with purpose and spoke with authority earned through service. After 2 tours overseas, he'd returned to their Brooklyn neighborhood and opened a small dojo in a converted warehouse. The sign outside read Allison's Academy, where warriors are made, but everyone who trained there knew it was more than that. It was a sanctuary. In a community where kids stumbled into gang territory before they stumbled into opportunity, where violence was a language learned earlier than algebra, Frankie offered something radical: discipline as an alternative to destruction. He taught traditional martial arts, taekwondo, jiu-jitsu, a hybrid system he developed that emphasized control over chaos. But more than techniques, he taught a code. Brittany remembered sitting in the dojo after her father's classes, watching him bow to students who couldn't afford to pay, who came in wearing clothes that had seen too many washes and shoes held together with duct tape. He never turned anyone away. Money doesn't make warriors, he'd say. Character does. She was 8 when he started training her seriously. Before that, she'd played around the edges, mimicking movements, laughing when she fell. But 8 was when he sat her down on the mat, looked into her eyes with that intensity that made generals listen, and said, "Baby girl, I'm going to teach you something more important than how to fight. I'm going to teach you why not to." The code was simple in words, complex in practice: protect the weak. Never throw the first punch. Never fight for ego. Honor is choosing restraint when you could destroy. Strength isn't about what you can do to someone, Frankie would tell her, making her repeat it until the words became part of her breathing. It's about what you choose not to do. We protect, we don't punish. We stand, we don't strike first. That's honor. Young Brittany had struggled with this. She'd been bullied at school for her hand-me-down clothes, for the way her mother smelled like cleaning chemicals when she picked her up, for being the scholarship kid in programs designed for children whose parents had time and money. "Daddy, why can't I just hit them back?" she'd cried one afternoon, her 8-year-old fists clenched in frustration. "I'm strong enough." Frankie had crouched to her level, his calloused hands gentle on her shoulders. "Because baby girl, if you hit them, you become what they think you are, someone angry, someone without control. But if you move like water, redirect like wind, and stand like a mountain, you show them that discipline beats rage every single time. You show them they're wrong about you." "But what if they don't stop?" she'd asked, tears streaming down her face. His eyes had gone sad but fierce, the look of a man who'd seen too much violence to glorify it. "Then you protect yourself and others with the minimum force necessary. You control the situation without losing control of yourself. That's the difference between a warrior and a brawler. Warriors know when to fight. Brawlers just know how." Brittany was 10 when the deployment notice came. Frankie was being called back, a situation overseas that needed his expertise. He'd promised it would be quick, 6 months, maybe 8. He'd made her promise to keep training, to help her mother, to remember the code. She'd kept that promise even after the folded flag arrived. Even after the military funeral where men in uniform handed Paige a triangle of fabric that was supposed to represent a life of service. Even after the dojo closed because her mother couldn't run it alone while working 3 jobs to keep them afloat. Paige Allison worked night cleaning shifts at Bayside Academy, from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., pushing industrial vacuums through hallways that reeked of privilege and pine-sol. She worked day shifts at an office building downtown, emptying trash cans and scrubbing toilets for people who never looked at her face. On weekends, she picked up shifts wherever she could, catering events, retail stocking, anything that paid. Bills piled on their kitchen counter like accusations. Rent. Utilities. Groceries bought with coupons and careful calculation. Brittany's clothes came from thrift stores, her shoes worn so thin she could feel every pebble through the sole. Her backpack was the same one she'd had since 6th grade, its zipper broken, its fabric fraying at the seams. But what she'd inherited from her father wasn't money or comfort. It was something wealthier kids would never have, a code forged in sacrifice, discipline earned through sweat and tears, and the bone-deep knowledge that honor was a choice she made every single day. She trained alone now, in the community center's basement when it was available, in parks when it wasn't. She'd prop her father's photo, him in his dress uniform, smiling that proud smile, against whatever surface was available. Then she'd bow, the formal bow he'd taught her, and begin her forms. Every stance, every movement was a conversation with the man she'd lost. Every drop of sweat was proof that his lessons hadn't died with him. But she didn't show off. She didn't tell anyone at Bayside about her training. The unspoken rule hung over her life like a sword: don't draw attention. We need this job. Her mother had gotten Brittany enrolled at Bayside through a program for children of staff members, a token gesture of equity that let elite institutions claim diversity while keeping the children of janitors and cafeteria workers in their place. Brittany ate lunch near the service entrance, where her mother took breaks between mopping floors. She wore thrift store jeans while other kids wore designer labels. She carried last year's phone while they filmed TikToks on the latest models. The whispers followed her everywhere. She doesn't belong here. Look at those shoes. The cleaning lady's kid. Other students would pass her in hallways without seeing her, their eyes sliding past as if she were part of the infrastructure, as invisible as the walls her mother scrubbed. Brittany had learned to observe from the margins. She saw everything, the hierarchies, the cruelties, the way money created invisible armor that let some kids destroy others without consequence. She saw the boy with the walker who ate alone, surrounded by an invisible bubble that reeked of dangerous protection. She saw which kids were hunters and which were prey. And every day, she made the same choice her father had taught her to make. She stayed quiet. She stayed disciplined. She protected her mother's livelihood by never becoming a problem. But inside, where her father's code lived like fire in her bones, she was always ready. Always watching. Always prepared for the moment when silence would no longer be an option. Because Frankie Allison had taught her one more lesson, the one that mattered most. Sometimes, baby girl, the greatest courage isn't fighting. It's knowing when you must. Listen. I spent weeks researching this story. I interviewed people. I cried writing it. And right now, you're hooked, I can tell. But here's the thing, if you don't hit that subscribe button right now, you're going to forget. You'll scroll past. And when I post the next story that changes someone's perspective on life, that makes someone feel less alone in their pain, that story won't reach you. And maybe that was the story you needed to hear. So do yourself a favor. 2 seconds. Hit subscribe. Because stories like this, stories that make you feel something real, are rare. Don't let them pass you by. Bayside Academy gleamed like a promise it never intended to keep. The building was an architectural masterpiece of glass and steel, designed by someone famous whose name appeared on plaques throughout the campus. Floors buffed to mirror shines. Walls adorned with abstract art that cost more than most families' annual income. Hallways wide enough to accommodate the egos that strutted through them. This was where old money met new money met dangerous money, where children of hedge fund managers mingled with children of tech billionaires and, in rare cases, the offspring of men whose wealth came from enterprises the IRS didn't document. The parking lot was a showroom of luxury, Teslas humming beside BMWs, the occasional Bentley or Maserati whose presence communicated more than any words could. Everything at Bayside whispered power. The uniforms were custom-tailored. The cafeteria served sushi-grade tuna and organic, locally sourced everything. The technology was cutting-edge. The college counselors had direct lines to Ivy League admissions offices. This wasn't just a school, it was a finishing academy for the children of New York's elite, a place where futures were secured before they even began. Harry Kim's reputation cast a long shadow over those pristine hallways. Everyone knew who Jason's father was, even if they didn't say it directly. The knowledge hung in the air like expensive cologne, obvious but unacknowledged. Teachers graded Jason's work with extra care, afraid that a failing mark might result in consequences they couldn't imagine. Administrators approved his accommodations with nervous efficiency. Other parents made sure their children knew to be nice to the Kim boy, though nice meant different things to different people. For some, it meant pity, the condescending kindness offered to someone they considered broken. For others, it meant fear-based avoidance. And for a select few, it meant something darker, an opportunity to strike at Harry Kim through the one target he couldn't armor with threats or money. The cruel irony wasn't lost on Jason. His father's empire was built on making people afraid. That fear was supposed to protect him. Instead, it isolated him in a bubble where every interaction was contaminated by reputation. Kids didn't approach him as a potential friend, they approached him as the Mafia boss's disabled son, a fascinating problem they didn't know how to solve. What good is a Mafia king who can't even fix his own kid? The whisper circulated through Bayside like urban legend, repeated by kids who'd heard their parents say it at dinner parties, who'd absorbed the casual cruelty that privilege mistakes for sophistication. The subtext was clear, Harry Kim might control territory from Brooklyn to Queens, might have judges and politicians in his pocket, might make problems disappear with a phone call. But he couldn't make his son's legs work properly. What kind of power was that? The mockery came in forms subtle and overt. Sometimes it was the exaggerated politeness, kids holding doors open with theatrical courtesy that felt more like performance than kindness. Sometimes it was the whispered jokes that cut off when Jason wheeled past. Sometimes it was the way they'd walk just fast enough that he couldn't keep up, then act surprised when they forgot he was there. If Jason existed in a gilded cage, Brittany and her mother didn't even have bars, they were simply erased. Cleaning staff at Bayside were part of the infrastructure, like heating systems or Wi-Fi routers. Essential to function but invisible to consciousness. Students left trash wherever it fell, confident that someone would clean it. They changed in locker rooms while Paige mopped nearby, conversations continuing as if she weren't human enough to hear. Brittany was marked by association. The help's daughter was both her identity and her sentence. She could attend classes because of the staff program, but she'd never truly belong. Other students didn't bully her overtly, that would require acknowledging her existence. Instead, they practiced casual erasure, the kind of social violence that left no marks but hollowed you out from the inside. The cafeteria crystallized Bayside's hierarchy better than any org chart could. It was a massive space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a courtyard, designer furniture arranged in careful clusters that discouraged mixing between social strata. At the center, like a royal court, was Tyler Russo's table. Tyler came from tech money, his mother had founded a startup that sold to Google for 9 figures. He was 16, handsome in that practiced way that came from expensive haircuts and personal trainers, and he wielded his privilege like a weapon he'd been trained to use since birth. His crew consisted of Sidney Reed, whose family owned half the real estate in Manhattan, and Devin Park, a senator's son who'd learned early that rules applied to other people. They sat at the center table not because anyone assigned it but because no one dared claim it first. Their laughter was loud and unchallenged. Their phones were always out, always recording, because in their world, cruelty was content and humiliation was entertainment. They were apex predators in an ecosystem designed to let them feed. Jason ate alone at a corner table, his walker folded beside him, his lunch half-eaten because anxiety killed appetite better than any diet. He'd learned to time his arrivals for maximum invisibility, not so early that he'd be alone when the hunters entered, not so late that finding a seat would be a public spectacle. His bodyguards waited outside, useless against the violence that mattered. From his corner, Jason could see everything. He saw Tyler's table at the center, saw the other kids orienting themselves around it like planets around a sun. He saw the way certain students were mocked openly while teachers looked away. He saw the phone cameras that came out whenever someone stumbled or spilled or said something stupid. He saw the ecosystem of casual cruelty that money and privilege had cultivated. And near the service entrance, where the industrial kitchen met the dining area, he saw Brittany. She sat on a metal stool beside where her mother took lunch breaks, eating food packed from home in reused containers. Her clothes were clean but worn. Her posture was perfect but her eyes were down. She was 14 but carried herself with a stillness that seemed older, like she'd learned early that survival meant making yourself small. Jason had noticed her before, the way you notice anything that repeats in your daily pattern. The girl whose mother cleaned. The one who moved through hallways like a ghost. He'd never spoken to her, never spoken to anyone, really, but he recognized something in her silence. It was different from his own. His silence was defeat. Hers was something else. Something waiting. Tyler noticed her too, but in the way predators notice prey. "Hey, cleaning lady's kid," he'd called once, his voice carrying across the cafeteria. "Your mom miss a spot in the bathroom. You gonna help her scrub toilets after school?" The table had erupted in laughter. Brittany hadn't looked up, hadn't responded, had simply kept eating as if the air itself hadn't turned poisonous. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, Tyler's attention had sharpened. He was bored with the usual targets, looking for new entertainment. And there was something about Brittany's refusal to react that intrigued him the way a locked door intrigues a thief. What would it take to break her calm? What would make the invisible girl finally seen? Jason saw the shift happening, saw Tyler's gaze tracking Brittany with increasing frequency. He recognized the pattern because he'd lived it. Tyler was circling, testing, building up to something bigger. And when it came, it would be filmed. It would be public. It would be designed for maximum humiliation. Jason wanted to warn her, but what would he say? How could he protect anyone when he couldn't protect himself? His father's reputation was supposed to be armor, but it was really just another cage. Brittany had no such protection. She had her mother's job to think about, an unspoken rule that kept her silent even in the face of cruelty. So they existed in the same space, invisible for different reasons, suffering different types of erasure. Neither knew that their paths were about to collide. Neither knew that the cafeteria, that pristine space built on money and hierarchy, was about to become a battlefield where everything would change. The gilded cage was about to break open. And when it did, the whole world would be watching. Friday lunch carried a different energy at Bayside Academy. It was the last period before the weekend, which meant students were looser, louder, less concerned with maintaining the thin veneer of civility that weekday supervision demanded. Teachers rotated through the cafeteria in shifts, but their presence was more symbolic than effective, crossing guards at an intersection no one intended to respect. Jason had learned to hate Fridays. The anticipation of freedom made his classmates reckless, and recklessness always found targets. He entered the cafeteria later than usual, his walker's rubber feet squeaking against polished tile. His bodyguards waited outside per school policy, a rule the administration had implemented after parents complained that armed security made their children uncomfortable. Jason's discomfort, apparently, was less important than their aesthetic preferences. The cafeteria was already packed, the noise level approaching pain. Jason made his way to his usual corner table, focusing on each step, on not stumbling, on being invisible enough that no one would notice his passage. He almost made it. Tyler Russo's voice cut through the din like a knife through silk. Well. Look who finally decided to show up. Tyler stood from the center table, his crew flanking him like wolves sensing wounded prey. Sidney Reed cracked his knuckles, a gesture so cliché it would have been funny if Jason's heart weren't already hammering against his ribs. Devin Park held up his phone, camera already recording. Jason kept walking. Maybe if he ignored them. Maybe if he just reached his table. Maybe. His walker kicked out from under him. One moment it was supporting his weight, the next it was airborne, held high like a hunting trophy in Tyler's hands. Jason's legs, unable to compensate, buckled. He hit the ground hard, his lunch tray exploding against tile. Kimchi and rice scattered like shrapnel. Apple juice pooled around his knees, soaking through his uniform pants. Walk much, cripple? Tyler's voice dripped with mock concern, his Korean accent an exaggerated parody that made Jason's stomach turn. The cafeteria erupted. Laughter rolled through the space like thunder. Phones shot up instantly, dozens of them, red recording lights burning like predators' eyes in the artificial light. Jason tried to stand, his hands slipping in spilled food. Tyler shoved him back down, not hard enough to injure but hard enough to humiliate. Oops. Sorry. Guess those Mafia millions can't buy you working legs, huh? Another shove. Juice cascaded down Jason's shirt, cold and sticky. What's Daddy gonna do? Send his goons to beat up a school? Make me disappear? The chant started somewhere in the back, picked up momentum like a viral infection. Fight, fight, fight. Students crowded closer, forming a circle that felt more like a cage. Some held with laughter, filming with gleeful malice. Others stared with guilty fascination, the kind of people who slowed down at car accidents. No one helped. No one called for teachers. This was entertainment. This was proof they'd got the untouchable Mafia boss's kid. Sidney Reed grabbed Jason's collar, lifting him slightly. Your mom died because your dad's a criminal. You're a cripple because God's punishing him. You're a joke, Kim. A expensive, pathetic joke. Something inside Jason cracked. Not anger, he'd learned anger was useless. Something deeper. The final shard of hope that maybe tomorrow would be different, that maybe someone would see him as human rather than target or trophy. Tears burned behind his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. That would be giving them exactly what they wanted. Across the cafeteria, near the service entrance where industrial fans hummed and the smell of cleaning chemicals mixed with food, Brittany Allison set down her sandwich. She'd been eating with her mother during Paige's lunch break, their routine conversation about homework and bills interrupted by the sudden shift in cafeteria energy. Brittany had seen these moments before, the gathering of phones, the circling of predators, the way violence announced itself before it arrived. She watched Tyler kick Jason's walker away again when the boy tried to reach for it. Watched the juice-soaked uniform, the scattered food, the way Jason's whole body trembled with humiliation that cut deeper than any physical wound. She saw something else too, the same hollow resignation she'd seen in her own mirror after bad days, the look of someone who'd stopped expecting rescue. Paige's hand clamped around Brittany's wrist, fingers tight with fear that had nothing to do with the boy being hurt and everything to do with their survival. Don't. Her mother's voice was low, urgent, carrying the weight of every late-night shift, every rent check that barely cleared, every time they'd had to swallow dignity to keep food on the table. Baby, we can't afford. They're hurting him, Mama. I know. But if you get involved, if you make a scene. Paige's eyes were bright with unshed tears, with the terrible mathematics of poverty that forced impossible choices. We need this job. We need this school for you. Please. Brittany looked at her mother. At the woman who worked 16-hour days and still found energy to help with homework. At the hands rough from chemicals and labor, gripping her wrist with desperate love. At the uniform that marked them as less than in a building that gleamed with other people's wealth. She saw everything her mother had sacrificed, understood the cost of what she was about to do. She stood anyway. The movement was quiet but it carried weight. Brittany rose from her metal stool, her posture straight, her breathing controlled the way her father had taught her. She wasn't tall, 5'4" and slender, but something in the way she moved made space around her shift. She crossed invisible lines with each step, lines of class that separated staff children from student children, lines of race that marked who belonged in the spotlight, lines of silence that told her kind to stay small and grateful. Tyler didn't notice her at first. He was too busy playing to his audience, too confident in his dominance. But Sydney Reed saw her coming and elbowed Tyler, nodding in her direction with a grin that promised new entertainment. Tyler turned, his expression cycling from confusion to recognition to something uglier. Oh look. His voice carried across the cafeteria, amplified by the acoustics and his own practiced cruelty. The cleaning lady's kid. What, you gonna mop this up? Help your mama earn her paycheck? Laughter rippled through the crowd, but it was different now, uncertain, waiting to see where this was going. Brittany didn't respond. She simply walked forward, her eyes on Jason, her movements measured and calm. She knelt beside him, her voice quiet enough that only he could hear. I've got you. Let's get you up. Jason looked at her with eyes that had forgotten what kindness looked like. You don't have to. I know, Brittany said. I'm doing it anyway. Tyler's face flushed red. Being ignored was worse than being challenged. He stepped forward, positioning himself between Brittany and Jason's walker. Did I say you could touch him? Did anyone ask for the help to help? He emphasized the word help like it was an insult, which in his world, it was. Brittany met his eyes for the first time, and Tyler felt something unexpected, a flicker of uncertainty. There was no fear there, no anger, just steady assessment. Like she was measuring him and finding him wanting. It made him want to hurt her, to break that calm and prove he was the one with power here. Move, Tyler said, shoving her shoulder. Unless you want what he's getting. Brittany didn't move. She simply adjusted her stance slightly, weight distributed in a way that Tyler's shove barely budged her. Around them, phones focused, capturing everything. The chant had died, replaced by anticipatory silence. Everyone sensed something was about to happen. They just didn't know what. Tyler grabbed Jason's walker again, holding it out of reach. Come on, Maid's kid. Make me give it back. I dare you. And that's when Brittany made her choice. Not the choice to fight, her father's code forbade that. But the choice to stand. To be seen. To break every rule of invisibility that had kept her and her mother safe. Give him back his walker, she said, loud enough now for everyone to hear. Her voice was steady, without anger or aggression, which somehow made it more threatening. Then walk away. Tyler laughed, the sound sharp and theatrical. Or what? You'll tell your mama? Maybe she can scrub me into submission? The crowd laughed with him, phones recording every word, every gesture, capturing the moment for eternal replay. Or, Brittany said, her voice still calm, still controlled, you'll find out why you should have walked away when I asked nicely. The cafeteria held its breath. Tyler's face contorted with rage and something else, the dawning realization that maybe, just maybe, he'd miscalculated. But he'd gone too far to back down now. Not with everyone watching. Not with everything recorded. He dropped Jason's walker and stepped toward Brittany, his hands curling into fists. Let's see what you got, cleaning lady's daughter. Brittany didn't move. She simply waited, her father's voice echoing in her memory, protect the weak. Never throw the first punch. She'd made her stand. Now she'd see it through, whatever came next. Behind her, Jason watched with wide eyes. Around them, the crowd pressed closer, phones high, capturing everything. The spark had ignited. And there was no putting it out now. Tyler swung first. It wasn't a calculated strike, it was rage translated into momentum, the kind of wild haymaker thrown by someone who'd never been taught proper form, who'd never needed it because size and aggression had always been enough. His fist cut through air where Brittany's head had been a microsecond before. She'd moved before his muscles completed the thought, her body reading the telegraph of his shoulder rotation, his weight shift forward. The movement was economical, efficient, a sidestep that took her just outside his range while keeping Jason behind her. Tyler's fist hit nothing but air and the momentum carried him stumbling forward, off balance. The cafeteria gasped. Phones zoomed in, capturing every frame. This wasn't what they'd expected. The cleaning lady's kid was supposed to get hit, supposed to cry, supposed to provide content that would trend for days. Instead, Tyler was stumbling like someone had pulled his strings wrong. Stand still. Tyler snarled, his face flushed with embarrassment and exertion. He charged again, this time attempting a tackle, trying to use his size advantage. Brittany waited until the last possible moment, that fraction of a second when commitment becomes inevitable, then pivoted. Her hand caught his shoulder, not striking but guiding, redirecting his momentum with the kind of precision that comes from 10,000 hours of practice. Tyler's own force became his enemy. He crashed into the center table, designer lunch trays scattering, organic quinoa bowls exploding across pristine surfaces. The table leg scraped against tile with a sound like a scream. Sydney Reed moved next, charging from Brittany's blind side with the calculated aggression of someone who wrestled for sport. He was bigger than Tyler, more athletic, and he'd wrapped up opponents before. His arms reached for her waist, intending to lift and slam her into the ground. But Brittany had already sensed him, her father's training had made her aware of space and movement in ways that went beyond sight. As Sydney closed in, she dropped her center of gravity, making herself heavier than her frame suggested. His hands found nothing to grip. Then she stepped inside his guard, her shoulder pressing against his chest at precisely the angle that turned his forward momentum into rotational force. Sydney went sprawling, his athletic grace betrayed by physics he didn't understand. He hit the floor hard, sliding through spilled juice and kimchi, his designer polo streaked with food and humiliation. The cafeteria erupted. This wasn't entertainment anymore, this was something else. Something none of them had language for. The girl who cleaned their spilled drinks, whose mother mopped their floors, was dismantling two of Bayside's most athletic students without breaking a sweat. Without throwing a punch. Without even breathing hard. Can we just stop for a second? Because if you're feeling what I'm feeling right now, if your chest is tight and your eyes are burning, then you understand why I can't stop telling these stories. This is real pain. Real love. Real sacrifice. And if you value content that doesn't insult your intelligence or numb your emotions, then you owe it to yourself to subscribe. Not because I need it. Because you need to know that stories like this exist. That someone out there is still creating things that matter. Hit subscribe. Then let's finish breaking your heart together. Tyler scrambled to his feet, rage overtaking any sense of self-preservation. You think you're special? You think some ghetto karate makes you better than us? He grabbed a lunch tray, wielding it like a weapon. The crowd tensed. This was escalating beyond the usual cafeteria theater. He swung the tray at Brittany's head. She ducked under it, the metal passing so close she felt the air displacement. Tyler stumbled from his own missed swing, and Brittany's foot swept behind his ankle, not a kick, just a gentle removal of the ground beneath him. He went down again, the tray clattering away. In that moment, Brittany wasn't in Bayside's cafeteria. She was 8 years old again, sitting on the mat in her father's dojo, tears streaming down her face because the girls at school had mocked her shoes, her lunch, her very existence. "Daddy, why can't I just hit them back?" Her child voice cracked with frustration. "I'm strong enough." Frankie Allison had set down the heavy bag he'd been working on and crouched to her level, his massive hands gentle on her small shoulders. "Because baby girl, strength isn't about what you can do to someone. It's about what you choose not to do." His eyes held that intensity that made generals listen during his service. "We protect, we don't punish. We stand, we don't strike first. That's honor." "But what if they don't stop?" 8-year-old Brittany had asked, her fists clenched tight with powerless anger. His expression had shifted, sad but fierce, the look of a man who'd seen enough violence to know its true cost. "Then you move like water, redirect like wind, and stand like a mountain." He'd taken her small fists in his large hands, gently unclenching them. "You show them that discipline beats rage every single time. You show them they're wrong about you. About us." "How?" "By never becoming what they think we are. By being so controlled, so precise, that they can't deny our mastery. Violence is easy, baby girl. Restraint? That's where real strength lives." Back in the cafeteria, Tyler and Sydney were on the floor. Devon Park was circling like a fighter who'd just watched his corner men get dismantled. Brittany hadn't thrown a single punch. She'd simply moved like water, redirected like wind, stood like a mountain. Exactly as her father had taught her. Devon was smarter than his friends, or maybe just more cautious. He studied Brittany for a moment, looking for weakness, for an opening. Then he charged low, attempting a tackle from an angle that should have been inescapable. Should have been. Brittany read his body language, the slight dip of his shoulder, the way his weight loaded onto his front foot. She stepped aside at the last possible instant, her hand guiding his head past her hip with the gentlest pressure. Devon's momentum carried him straight into a cluster of chairs. The crash was spectacular, metal and plastic tumbling like dominoes. He emerged tangled in chair legs, his expensive haircut disheveled, his dignity in ruins. The cafeteria was chaos now. Some students were screaming, others filming with shaking hands, still others chanting Brittany's name like she'd scored the winning touchdown. Tyler struggled to his feet one more time, his face contorted with rage and something darker, the fury of privilege confronted with its own impotence. "You fucking," he lunged again, but this time there was real danger in it. His hand reached for Brittany's throat, his weight committed to overwhelming her through sheer mass and violence. But she was already moving, already redirecting, already demonstrating that technique would always defeat rage. She caught his wrist, stepped inside his guard, and used his own momentum to send him spinning into Sydney, who'd just gotten to his feet. Both boys went down in a tangle of limbs and expensive athletic wear. The crowd roared. Brittany stepped back, her breathing still controlled, her stance still ready. 3 boys on the ground. Not one punch thrown. Not one offensive strike. Only protection, only redirection, only the living embodiment of her father's code. Around her, phones captured everything, the impossible reality of a 14-year-old girl dismantling 3 athletic teenage boys using nothing but discipline and technique. She turned away from Tyler's crew and walked to where Jason sat frozen, watching her with something between awe and disbelief. She picked up his walker from where Tyler had thrown it, checked it for damage, then extended her hand to Jason. "Let's get you up," she said, her voice steady as stone despite the chaos surrounding them. Jason took her hand, his fingers trembling. She pulled him up with practiced care, the kind that suggested she'd helped people stand before, that understood the mechanics of balance and support. Once he was upright, she positioned his walker correctly, adjusted the handles to account for his posture. Then she met his eyes, and for the first time since his mother died, Jason felt truly seen. "Stand tall," Brittany said, loud enough that the whole cafeteria could hear despite the noise. "You're stronger than they'll ever be." Around them, the world erupted into chaos. Security was pushing through the crowd, teachers were shouting, students were screaming or cheering or capturing everything on their phones. But in that moment, standing together surrounded by overturned chairs and spilled food and the wreckage of Tyler's pride, Jason and Brittany existed in a bubble of something approaching peace. He stood taller. And for the first time in forever, he believed the words someone had spoken to him. Security burst through the cafeteria doors like they were executing a raid. 3 officers in Bayside's gray uniforms, radios crackling, hands already reaching for Brittany before they'd assessed the situation. It happened so fast. One moment she was helping Jason stand, the next she was being grabbed by rough hands that didn't care about gentleness or truth. "Don't move," the lead officer shouted, his grip on Brittany's arm hard enough to bruise. "Hands where I can see them." They'd made their assumptions in the 30 seconds it took to respond to frantic cafeteria calls. Black girl standing over 3 white and Asian boys on the ground. The daughter of a cleaning lady in an altercation with students whose parents donated to the building fund. The conclusion seemed obvious to men trained to see certain patterns and blind to others. Brittany didn't resist. Her father had taught her this too, how to survive encounters with authority, how to make yourself non-threatening even when you'd done nothing wrong. She let them grip her arms, let them position her against the wall, let them treat her like the problem they'd already decided she was. It wasn't her. Jason's voice cracked through the cafeteria din, high and desperate. But security ignored him. The Mafia boss's disabled kid was a victim by default. The cleaning lady's daughter was suspicious by design. Paige came running from the kitchen, still wearing her cleaning uniform, rubber gloves dripping soapy water. Her face held every nightmare a parent carries, the terror of seeing your child in danger, the helplessness of knowing your poverty makes you powerless to protect them. She pushed through the crowd with none of her usual deference, her voice breaking. "That's my daughter. Let her go." She didn't, her words died as she saw the scene, Brittany against the wall, Tyler and his crew getting to their feet with security treating them like victims, phones everywhere capturing her family's humiliation for eternal replay. Tyler stood up, his lip bleeding but his smirk intact. He'd lost the physical confrontation but he was already winning the narrative. "She attacked us for no reason," he said, his voice carrying the wounded innocence of someone who'd practiced lying to authority his whole life. "We were just talking to Jason, trying to be friendly, and she went crazy. Started hitting people." Sydney Reed nodded, wincing theatrically. "She's been threatening me for weeks. Said she was going to make us pay. I guess this is what she meant." Devon Park, extracting himself from the chair tangle, added his testimony. "It was unprovoked, sir. Completely unprovoked. I think she has some kind of anger problem." The security officers nodded, their assumptions confirmed. The head officer pulled out handcuffs. Actual handcuffs, for a 14-year-old girl whose only crime was protecting someone who couldn't protect himself. Paige sobbed, reaching for her daughter, being pushed back by an officer who said, "Ma'am, stay back," with the kind of authority that erases mothers into maids. The cafeteria felt like it was spinning. Jason watched in horror as the girl who'd saved him was being arrested for the crime of her courage. Tyler's smirk widened. Phones kept recording, capturing what would become the official narrative, the violent black girl, the innocent white and Asian boys, the concerned security, the hysterical cleaning lady. "No." The single word cut through the chaos like a blade. Luna Huang stepped forward, her phone held high, her voice steady despite visible trembling. She was Tyler's cousin, same tech money, same elite zip code, but she'd spent the last 2 minutes queuing up footage on her phone, her hands shaking with something between fear and rage. "No," she repeated, louder now. "That's not what happened." Tyler's smirk faltered. "Luna, stay out of this. I recorded everything." Luna's voice gained strength. She was small, barely 5 feet, but she commanded space through sheer moral weight. "Every single thing. From the moment you kicked Jason's walker until Brittany put Devon in those chairs. And it's already uploading to cloud storage, so don't even think about trying to take my phone." She connected her phone to the cafeteria's smartboard system, the same screens Tyler's crew used to humiliate their victims, now repurposed for truth. The footage began playing, impossibly clear, every word captured by Luna's premium phone camera. The cafeteria watched in collective silence as Tyler's voice emerged from the speakers, dripping with mock Korean accent. Walk much, cripple? They watched Jason hit the ground, food exploding around him. They heard Sydney's words, your mom died because your dad's a criminal. You're a cripple because God's punishing him. They saw phones rise immediately, saw the crowd gather for entertainment, saw Tyler shove Jason down again and again. They saw Brittany stand, saw her mother try to stop her, saw her cross the cafeteria with quiet determination. They heard Tyler's words, the cleaning lady's kid. You gonna mop this up? The footage showed everything with brutal clarity. Brittany never initiated contact. Never threw a punch. Every movement was defensive, every technique designed to protect rather than harm. The video showed Tyler swing first, showed Sydney charge second, showed Devin attempt his tackle. Showed Brittany redirect, guide, control, showed water flowing around rocks. And it captured audio. Brittany's voice, calm and clear, give him back his walker. Then walk away. Tyler's response, let's see what you got, cleaning lady's daughter. The racial edge in his words, the casual cruelty, the way he weaponized her mother's job like it was ammunition. The security officer holding Brittany's arm slowly released her. The head officer's face had gone pale, realizing how close they'd come to arresting a victim while treating aggressors like wounded innocents. Tyler's smirk had completely vanished, replaced by calculation, already thinking about lawyers, about how to spin this, about damage control. But Luna wasn't done. She disconnected her phone and faced the crowd, her voice carrying despite her size. This is what happens here. Every day. People like Tyler torment people like Jason, and we all just film it for entertainment. And when someone finally stands up, we assume they're the problem because of what they look like or who their parents are. Paige moved to her daughter, wrapping Brittany in arms that shook with relief and fury and love. Security stood awkwardly, radio silent now, uncertain how to proceed when the evidence contradicted every assumption they'd made. Brittany gently extracted herself from her mother's embrace and faced the cafeteria. When she spoke, her voice was calm but it carried weight that silenced even the most distant whispers. We don't throw the first punch, she said, each word deliberate. We don't fight for ego. We stand for those who can't stand alone. That's what my father taught me. Master Sergeant Frankie Allison, who served this country and came home to teach kids like me that honor means choosing restraint when you could destroy. She looked directly at Tyler, at Sydney Reed, at Devon Park. You have everything, money, privilege, safety. And you chose to use it to hurt someone who'd never done anything to you except exist. That's not strength. That's cowardice dressed up in expensive clothes. For the first time in months, Jason found his voice. It started quiet, barely audible, then grew stronger as Paige noticed and touched Brittany's shoulder, as students nearby turned to look. She saved me, Jason said, his voice cracking but carrying. They would have hurt me, and she saved me. She's braver than anyone in this room. The cafeteria erupted. Not with fight this time, but with something different, justice. Brittany. Justice. The chant built like a wave, students who'd been silent witnesses finally finding their voices. Some were crying, others shouting, still others just holding up their phones with Luna's video replaying, sharing it to every platform they could access. Within seconds, the footage was everywhere. Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, the algorithmic machinery of virality recognizing gold when it saw it. Hashtag Maid's Kid Saves Kingpin's Son started trending before security had figured out what to do. Hashtag Real Strength followed seconds later. Paige held her daughter as students swarmed them, not with mockery but with support. Kids Brittany had never spoken to were touching her arm, thanking her, apologizing for their silence. Jason stood beside his walker, tears streaming down his face, watching the girl who'd been invisible finally, devastatingly seen. Security made Tyler, Sydney, and Devin leave the cafeteria, finally treating them like what they were, aggressors caught on camera, their cruelty immortalized in high definition. The head officer approached Brittany and Paige with what might have been an apology forming on his lips, but Paige's look stopped him cold. Don't, she said quietly. Just don't. And there, surrounded by overturned furniture and scattered food and the wreckage of assumptions, two families stood together. The son of a crime boss and the daughter of a cleaning lady, both finally protected not by money or power, but by truth and courage, and one 14-year-old girl who'd learned that standing up was worth any cost. The video kept spreading. And everything was about to change. The video hit social media like a match dropped in gasoline. Within minutes, Luna's footage had escaped Bayside's bubble and entered the algorithmic machinery that decides what the world pays attention to. The numbers climbed with dizzying speed: 10,000 views, 50,000, 100,000. By the time Brittany and Paige left the school that afternoon, the video had crossed 1 million. The juxtaposition was irresistible to an internet hungry for stories that upended expectations. Daughter of a cleaning lady. Son of a crime boss. A cafeteria in an elite academy where tuition cost more than most people's annual salary. 3 wealthy boys humiliated by a girl they dismissed as invisible. Discipline defeating privilege. Honor answering cruelty. The narrative wrote itself, and millions rushed to share it. Hashtag Maid's kid saves Kingpin's son trended within an hour. Hashtag real strength followed. Hashtag Brittany Allison became a name that people who'd never met her felt they knew intimately. Instagram filled with screenshots of the moment Brittany returned Jason's walker, that instant where vulnerability met strength and something fundamental shifted. TikTok exploded with reaction videos, people watching the footage with tears streaming down their faces, with rage at Tyler's mockery, with awe at Brittany's technique. The comments section became a digital town square where strangers gathered to witness something that mattered. She didn't throw a single punch and dismantled 3 guys. That's what actual martial arts looks like. Notice how the Mafia boss's money couldn't protect his son but the maid's daughter could. That says everything about real power. I'm crying at Stand Tall. You're stronger than they'll ever be. That's the most powerful thing I've heard in years. This is what discipline over destruction looks like. This is what honor looks like. This is what real strength looks like. The way she helped him up before defending him. The way she never lost control. The way she carried her father's legacy. I'm not okay. But the internet didn't stop at commentary. It did what it does best when properly motivated: it investigated. Within hours, digital detectives had traced Brittany's lineage, found Frankie Allison's military records, discovered his community dojo, located obituaries and news articles about a decorated veteran who dedicated his post-service life to teaching inner-city kids discipline as an alternative to destruction. News outlets picked up the story by evening. Local channels sent crews to Brooklyn, to the neighborhood where Frankie had taught, to the community center where his dojo sign still hung even though the space had been repurposed. They interviewed people who'd known him, who'd trained under him, who'd sent their children to learn from a man who believed honor was stronger than violence. Master Sergeant Allison taught our kids discipline when the streets taught destruction, said an older woman whose 3 sons had all trained with Frankie. He gave them a code to live by. Protect, don't punish. Stand, don't strike first. His daughter carries that torch. You can see it in how she moved, pure technique, pure control. That's her father's legacy living through her. A former student, now a college athlete, spoke with tears in his eyes. Coach Frankie saved my life. I was headed toward gangs, toward violence, toward becoming a statistic. He showed me that real strength wasn't about hurting people, it was about discipline, about honor, about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Brittany learned from the best. She is the best. The clip became more than viral content, it became symbol. Bullied kids across the country watched it on repeat, finding courage in Brittany's calm. Working-class families saw themselves in Paige's uniform, in the way she ran to her daughter despite knowing it might cost her job. People who'd spent their lives being dismissed as invisible saw validation in the way Brittany had been underestimated and then proved every assumption wrong. The moment that resonated most wasn't the martial arts, impressive as it was. It was the moment Brittany returned Jason's walker and their eyes met. Vulnerability meeting strength. Fear meeting courage. 2 kids who'd been invisible for different reasons finally seeing each other as fully human. The frame was captured, screenshot, turned into artwork, printed on t-shirts, shared millions of times with captions about what real protection looked like. But something unexpected happened in the viral spread. The story wasn't just resonating with one community, it was bridging divides that usually stayed fixed. Korean American community organizations reached out, moved by Jason's story in ways that surprised even them. Here was a child of their diaspora, carrying the weight of cultural expectations and disability discrimination, mocked with racist accents by boys who should have known better. His isolation, his shame, his silent suffering resonated with every Korean American kid who'd ever been othered, who'd ever felt the pressure to represent an entire culture while navigating a world that didn't always see their full humanity. "We see our children in Jason," wrote the director of a Korean American Family Services Center in her Instagram post that went viral in its own right. "The pressure to be perfect, to honor our families, to never show weakness. And we see in Brittany the ally we hope our children find, someone who sees past stereotype to the person underneath." Simultaneously, Black martial arts communities celebrated Brittany's technique and restraint with a pride that felt ancestral. Here was a Black girl using traditional discipline, honoring her military father's code, demonstrating mastery that couldn't be denied even by those who wanted to dismiss her. The way she moved, efficient, controlled, beautiful in its precision, became teaching material in dojos across the country. "This is what we've been teaching forever," said a sensei in Atlanta whose post garnered hundreds of thousands of views. Discipline over destruction. Control over chaos. She never lost her center, never let rage dictate her response. That's mastery. That's what we mean when we say martial arts is about peace, not violence. Master Sergeant Allison raised a warrior in the truest sense. The video transcended its origin point. It wasn't just about a cafeteria fight anymore, it was about class and race and disability and honor and the question of what real strength looked like when tested. It was about two communities finding common ground in shared marginalization and shared hope. It was about parents working impossible hours to raise children with values that money couldn't buy. By nightfall, the video had 10 million views. By morning, it would have 50 million. News anchors debated it. Op-eds analyzed it. Teachers showed it in classrooms to spark discussions about bullying, about privilege, about the difference between power and strength. But in a small apartment in Brooklyn, far from the digital firestorm, Paige and Brittany sat together on their worn couch in silence. Paige's phone hadn't stopped buzzing, interview requests, reporters wanting statements, strangers offering support or criticism or advice. She'd turned it off hours ago. "Mama," Brittany said quietly, her voice small in a way it hadn't been in the cafeteria. "Are we going to be okay? With the job, I mean." Paige pulled her daughter close, kissing the top of her head. "Baby girl, you stood up for someone who needed standing up for. You honored your father's code. You did everything right. If that costs us something, then the cost is worth it. But. No buts." Paige's voice was firm but gentle. "Your daddy taught you to protect the weak and never throw the first punch. You did exactly that. I'm proud of you. He'd be proud of you. The whole world is seeing what I've always known, you're extraordinary." Brittany cried then, the adrenaline finally draining, the weight of everything finally landing. Paige held her, rocking slightly, humming the same lullaby she'd hummed when Brittany was small. Outside their window, the city lights blazed. Somewhere, the video kept spreading, kept sparking conversations, kept changing minds and hearts. And in a penthouse across town, a crime boss was watching that same video for the dozenth time, seeing his son suffering with eyes finally opened, beginning to understand that the woman holding her daughter in that small Brooklyn apartment had taught him something his entire empire couldn't, what real strength actually meant. Harry Kim's private office occupied the top floor of what public records listed as an import-export consulting firm. The legitimate face of an organization whose actual business happened in shadows and handshakes, in territories marked by silence rather than signs. The room was all dark wood and leather, windows tinted enough to see out but not in, the kind of space that communicated power through restraint. He sat at the head of a mahogany table, surrounded by his lieutenants, men who'd proven their loyalty through years of service, who knew when to speak and when silence was survival. They were reviewing territory disputes in Queens, discussing someone's unpaid debt, planning responses to encroachment that couldn't be allowed to stand. Standard business for an organization that operated in the margins of legality. Harry's phone buzzed on the table. He ignored it. His people knew better than to interrupt these meetings unless the building was literally on fire. It buzzed again. Then again. A fourth time. The lieutenant mid-sentence faltered, glancing at the phone with concern that rippled through the room. "Boss," one of his men ventured carefully, "might be important." Harry picked up the phone, irritation flickering across his face. 12 texts. 7 missed calls. All from different members of his organization, all marked urgent. He opened the first message. "Your son is trending." The words made no sense. Jason didn't trend. Jason barely existed in the public consciousness beyond being the Kim kid in whispered conversations. Harry opened the link attached to the message, his lieutenants watching with nervous attention as his expression shifted from confusion to something harder to define. The video played on his phone screen. Harry watched it once, completely still, his face an unreadable mask that had been perfected through decades of never showing weakness. The cafeteria. Jason on the ground, food scattered, Walker kicked away. Tyler's mock Korean accent cutting through the audio like a knife. The crowd's laughter. The phone's recording his son's humiliation like it was entertainment. He watched the video again, slower this time, and this time he saw what he'd been missing for months. Every detail he'd been too absent to notice, too focused on protection as concept to recognize protection as need. The way Jason flinched before the push came, like he'd learned to anticipate violence. The practiced invisibility in how he tried to make himself small. The shame in his posture, like he believed he deserved this because his legs didn't work the way other kids' legs worked. Harry's hands tightened around the phone hard enough that the screen protector cracked slightly. Then the girl appeared in the frame. The cleaning lady's daughter. He'd seen her exactly once, in passing, registered her the way he registered all service staff, as furniture that happened to breathe. But here she was, standing up from the margins, crossing the cafeteria with purpose that radiated from a 14-year-old frame like she carried her own gravity. He watched her help Jason up. Watched Tyler escalate. Watched this child, because that's what she was, a child, use technique Harry recognized from his own training decades ago. Pure discipline. Water redirecting stone. She hadn't thrown a single punch, but she'd dismantled 3 teenage boys like they were training dummies, protecting his son with a skill that made his entire organization's muscle look clumsy. The video reached the moment that millions had screenshot, the moment that was already becoming iconic. Brittany returning Jason's walker, steadying his shoulder, meeting his eyes. "Stand tall. You're stronger than they'll ever be." Jason had stood taller. Harry's son, who'd learned to make himself invisible, who'd carried grief and shame like twin weights, had stood taller because a girl whose mother mopped floors had seen him as worth protecting. The meeting room was silent. Harry's lieutenants knew better than to speak, knew that whatever was happening in their boss's mind was territory they shouldn't enter uninvited. Harry set the phone down carefully, his expression still controlled, but something behind his eyes had shifted like tectonic plates rearranging. "Meeting's over," Harry said quietly. "Everyone out." They left without question, filing out with the discipline of soldiers who'd learned that obedience meant survival. The door closed. Harry was alone with his phone and a video that had been watched by millions but felt like it was meant only for him, a mirror held up by the universe, showing him everything he'd failed to see. He played it again, but this time he fast-forwarded past the fighting to focus on the background. There, near the service entrance, a woman in a cleaning uniform running toward the confrontation. The camera was focused on Brittany, but Harry zoomed in on the woman, on Paige. The way she moved, the terror and pride warring on her face, the way she held her daughter afterwards. Protective, proud, terrified all at once. He'd seen her before. Not just once. Months of seeing her without actually seeing. She cleaned Jason's school during night shifts that Harry scheduled his business around without ever considering why someone would work those hours. She existed in his peripheral vision the way wallpaper existed, necessary but unremarkable. Now he searched her name, found sparse digital footprints because people who worked 3 jobs didn't have time for social media. But he found photos, Paige in her uniform accepting an employee recognition award she probably couldn't afford to take time off to receive. Paige at a community event, smiling despite exhaustion that showed in the set of her shoulders. A years-old photo of Paige and a man in military dress uniform, Frankie Allison, whose obituary Harry found next. Decorated veteran. Community martial arts instructor. Died in service. Left behind a wife and daughter who inherited his code instead of his pension. Harry read about the dojo that had closed, about the community members who credited Frankie with saving their children from streets that devoured futures. About discipline taught as alternative to destruction. This woman raised a warrior on night shift wages. The thought settled in Harry's chest like a weight and a revelation. While he'd surrounded Jason with bodyguards and money and fear-based protection, Paige had raised Brittany with something more valuable, a code that meant she'd risk her mother's livelihood to protect a boy she'd never spoken to. A memory surfaced, sharp and unwelcome. Minicio on her deathbed, blood seeping through hospital sheets, her hand trembling against Harry's face. Promise me, don't let him grow up in fear. Not fear of others, not fear of disappointing you. Teach him to be strong in ways you never learned. I'll protect him, Harry had said, his voice breaking with grief and rage and helplessness. No one will touch him. I swear it. Minicio's eyes had held sadness that cut deeper than the bullets in her body. That's not the same thing, Harry. Protection isn't presence. Being safe isn't the same as being strong. Promise me you'll learn the difference. He'd promised because she was dying and you promise dying people anything. But he'd never understood what she meant. Until now. Until a 14-year-old girl had demonstrated in a cafeteria what Harry's empire couldn't achieve, teaching Jason that he was worth standing up for, that strength came from character rather than the fear his last name inspired. Harry picked up his phone and made a call. Cancel everything. Clear my schedule. Boss, you've got the... I said cancel everything. His voice carried the kind of authority that ended conversations. I'm going to Bayside Academy. He stood, grabbed his jacket, headed for the elevator. His driver was already waiting, having learned long ago to anticipate Harry's movements. As they pulled into traffic, Harry played the video again on the car screen, this time focusing only on Paige's face in the background. The way she'd gripped Brittany's arm, don't. We can't afford, knowing exactly what standing up would cost but watching her daughter do it anyway. The way she'd run when security grabbed Brittany, her dignity abandoned in maternal terror. The way she'd held her daughter afterwards, her body curled around Brittany like she could shield her from consequences with her own flesh. This woman raised a warrior on night shift wages, Harry thought again. What does that make her? The answer came quiet but certain, stronger than me. Harry Kim had built an empire on fear and force, had made men twice his size treat him like natural disaster made flesh. He could make problems disappear with phone calls. He could move money like rivers changing course. But he couldn't do what Paige Allison had done, raise a child who chose honor when cruelty demanded its moment, who protected the weak when doing so risked everything. The car moved through Manhattan traffic toward Bayside Academy. Harry watched the city pass, towers of wealth and power built on foundations of people like Paige who cleaned their floors and raised warriors in the margins. His phone kept buzzing with messages. The video was at 20 million views now, heading toward 50 million, becoming phenomenon rather than content. But Harry wasn't thinking about numbers or reputation or how this affected his organization's image. He was thinking about his son standing taller because someone had seen him. He was thinking about the woman who'd taught her daughter that some things mattered more than safety. He was thinking about Minicio's dying words and the promise he'd broken without knowing it. The car pulled up to Bayside Academy. Harry Kim stepped out into afternoon light, his usual entourage notably absent. For the first time in years, he was going somewhere without armor. Without the performance of power. Just a father who'd failed to see his son suffering and needed to thank the people who hadn't. Before we go to the ending, I'm going to be brutally honest with you. You're about to watch the most emotional part of this story. You're about to cry. And then you're going to close this video and go on with your life. And that's fine. But if you do that without subscribing, if you take this emotional experience and give nothing back, a small part of you is going to feel guilty. Because you know better. You know that the things that move us deserve our support. So here's your chance to feel good about yourself. Hit subscribe. Hit the like button. Leave a comment. Be someone who pays it forward. Because the next person who needs a story like this is counting on you to make sure it reaches them. Don't let them down. The next morning, Bayside Academy's cafeteria looked like a courtroom. Every seat filled with students, parents, faculty. Media crews waited outside, cameras pointed at exits, reporters checking equipment and preparing for whatever story was about to unfold. Inside, the air hummed with anticipation, part fear, part excitement, the electricity that comes before something irreversible. Tyler Russo stood at the front with Sydney Reed and Devon Park, their families flanking them like lawyers preparing for trial. Tyler's mother had the look of someone accustomed to making problems disappear through strategic donations and well-placed calls. Sydney Reed's father kept checking his phone, already calculating damage control. Devon's parents, the senator and his wife, wore expressions that suggested this was an inconvenience rather than a crisis, something to manage rather than address. Principal Morrison stood at a podium, her prepared statement clutched like armor. The video had forced her hand, 50 million views created accountability that money couldn't quite erase. Based on irrefutable video evidence and investigation into a pattern of behavioral issues, Bayside Academy has made the decision to expel Tyler Russo, Sydney Reed, and Devon Park effective immediately. The cafeteria erupted. Some students cheered. Others gasped. Tyler's mother shot to her feet, outrage incarnate, already preparing legal threats. The principal raised her hand for silence, began explaining the reasoning, the policies that had been violated, the zero-tolerance stance Bayside would take going forward. Then the doors opened and Harry Kim walked in. Silence fell like a guillotine. Every person in that cafeteria knew who he was, if not by face then by reputation, if not by reputation then by the way the very air seemed to change when he entered. Students who'd laughed at Jason froze. Parents who'd gossiped about the Mafia boss's disabled son suddenly found their shoes fascinating. Even Tyler's mother's outrage dissolved into wariness. Everyone expected violence. Threats. The criminal response of a man whose organization solved problems through fear and consequences. Security tensed. Teachers positioned themselves near exits. Tyler went pale, his bravado finally cracking. Harry walked past all of them without acknowledgement. His eyes scanned the crowd until he found what he was looking for, Paige and Brittany standing near the back, partially hidden behind other families, trying to remain invisible even now. Paige wore her cleaning uniform because she'd come straight from a shift, hadn't had time to change. Brittany stood close to her mother, protective even in her own exhaustion. Harry walked directly to them. The crowd parted, phones already recording, everyone waiting for the moment this became the disaster they'd expected. He stopped in front of Paige and Brittany, and then did something no one in that room had ever seen Harry Kim do. He bowed. A formal, respectful Korean bow that dropped his eyes to the floor, that showed the back of his neck in a gesture of complete vulnerability. The kind of bow reserved for elders, for people who commanded deep respect, for acknowledging a debt that couldn't be repaid with money. Ms. Allison. Brittany. Harry's voice carried through the shocked silence. Thank you for protecting my son when I failed to see he needed protecting. Paige's hand found Brittany's, gripping tight. Neither woman spoke, too stunned by the moment, by the crime boss bowing to the cleaning lady and her daughter in front of everyone who'd ever dismissed them. Harry straightened, then turned to face Tyler's parents, Sydney's father, the senator, and his wife. His expression shifted into something they recognized, the dangerous man they'd expected, but channeled into words rather than violence. Your son's attacked mine. Harry's voice was quiet but it filled the space like smoke. Mocked his disability. Used racist language. Turned his suffering into entertainment. In my world, there are consequences for that. In this world, you're fortunate that Ms. Allison raised her daughter better than I've been raising my son. He addressed the entire cafeteria now, students and parents and faculty who'd never heard Harry Kim speak publicly. I've spent Jason's life trying to make people fear hurting him. Bodyguards. Reputation. Money. All of it useless against the cruelty that actually mattered. Brittany showed me something better, teaching someone they're worth standing up for. That they're strong not despite their challenges but through them. Harry pulled out his phone, made a call on speaker. This is Harry Kim. I want to establish the Frankie Allison Memorial Martial Arts Scholarship Fund. Full funding for any kid who wants to learn discipline, honor, and how to protect rather than punish. Set aside $2 million to start. We'll grow it from there. The cafeteria erupted again, but this time with applause that started scattered and built into a wave. Harry ignored it, focused on Tyler and his crew. You three will apologize. Not just to Jason and Brittany, but to every student you targeted. Recorded apologies. Public. If you ever set foot near either of them again, you'll learn exactly why people cross the street when they see me coming. Tyler's mother started to protest, but her husband grabbed her arm, recognizing in Harry's tone that some battles weren't worth fighting. The senator opened his mouth, calculated political outcomes, closed it again. Sidney Reed's father, the real estate mogul, simply nodded once, a business transaction accepted. Harry moved through the crowd to where Jason sat with his walker, his son watching with eyes that held something between awe and fear. Harry sat down in the chair beside him, not hovering, not managing, just present. The gesture was awkward, unpracticed, but Jason's expression softened. I'm sorry, Harry said quietly, just to Jason, though the nearby phones caught it anyway. Your mother asked me to teach you to be strong. I didn't understand what that meant. I'm learning. Jason's hand found his father's, trembling slightly. She saved me, Dad. Brittany saved me. I know. Harry's voice cracked slightly. We'll figure out how to say thank you. Together. The assembly dissolved into chaos, reporters rushing in now that the main event had concluded, parents trying to process what they'd witnessed, students swarming Brittany and Jason. Principal Morrison attempted to regain control but it was useless. The story had already moved beyond institutional management into something larger. Weeks passed. The video's virality eventually subsided, replaced by the next phenomenon, but its impact didn't. Tyler and his crew issued their apologies through gritted teeth and left Bayside Academy's halls forever. The Frankie Allison Memorial Fund received donations from across the country, funding martial arts programs in communities that needed them. Brittany became something between celebrity and symbol, talked about by strangers, invited to speak at events, treated as inspiration by people who'd never met her. But in the quieter moments, away from cameras and comments, something unexpected developed. Harry called Paige on a Thursday evening, his voice careful. Ms. Allison. I was wondering if I could buy you coffee. To talk about the kids. Paige, exhausted from a double shift, suspicious of kindness from powerful men, considered declining. I'm not part of your world, Mr. Kim. I know. Harry's voice held something that might have been vulnerability. That's why I'm asking. They met at a diner between their worlds, not too nice, not too rough, neutral territory where crime bosses and cleaning ladies could be just two parents trying to figure out how to help their children. Coffee turned into dinner turned into Harry showing up at Jason's physical therapy appointments where Paige already was because Brittany had started helping Jason with homework. It was slow, careful, two people from impossible circumstances learning each other. Harry trying gentleness he'd buried under decades of violence. Paige teaching boundaries to a man who'd never heard no without consequences. They moved around each other like dancers learning new steps, aware that what they were building was fragile. The kids noticed first. Jason and Brittany had become friends, real friends, not just bonded by viral fame. She helped him with school, he made her laugh, they'd both discovered what it meant to be seen as fully human rather than incomplete stereotype. Are your parents, like? Brittany ventured one afternoon while they studied together in Jason's penthouse, both of them watching Harry and Paige talk by the windows, something intimate in the way they stood close without touching. Jason looked shy, hopeful, terrified. Would that be okay? If they were? Brittany considered. Your dad's kind of intense. Your mom makes him smile like I've never seen. He showed up to my martial arts demonstration last week. Sat in the back. Didn't say anything, just watched. Mom says he asks about you. Like, really asks. Wants to know what you're interested in, what you need. Brittany studied Jason, the boy who'd been on the ground when she first really saw him, now sitting taller, laughing more, carrying less shame. You stood up in that cafeteria. Spoke for me when security grabbed me. That means something. Jason's eyes got bright. You stood first. Literally stood. That means everything. 6 months after the video, Harry Kim did something even more unexpected than bowing to a cleaning lady. He proposed. But not before sitting down with Jason and Brittany separately, asking their permission in a way that made clear their answer mattered more than his own desires. The wedding was small, Harry's most trusted people, the ones who'd proven their loyalty meant more than fear, and Paige's church community, the people who'd supported her through Frankie's death and years of struggle. Jason and Brittany stood together, officially becoming siblings in a ceremony that felt less like obligation and more like choosing family. They merged households, Paige moving into the penthouse she'd once have cleaned, bringing warmth to space that had felt like mausoleum. Brittany gained protection she'd never had but didn't change who she was. Jason gained a sister who saw his strength and a mother figure who taught him that vulnerability wasn't weakness. The final morning started like any Monday at Bayside Academy. Jason and Brittany walked the halls together, his walker steady, her backpack slung over one shoulder. Students parted naturally, not from fear but from respect earned through viral fame and sustained through genuine character. They passed the cafeteria, that pristine space where everything had changed. Both paused at the doorway, looking at the spot where Tyler's table used to sit, where food had scattered, where a girl had stood up and a boy had found his voice. I still can't believe you did that, Jason said quietly. I still can't believe you spoke up, Brittany answered. Testified for me when you could have stayed quiet. We did it together. Brittany smiled, adjusting Jason's backpack that had slipped, while he steadied her when she stumbled slightly over her shoelace. That's what family does. They entered together, and for the first time since their mothers had married their fathers, since Jason had lost Minicio and Brittany had lost Frankie, since money had created cages and poverty had created invisibility, both of them belonged. They mocked a boy for his disability. They dismissed a girl because her mother cleaned their school. They thought power meant money and muscle, that strength was measured in fear and status. But when cruelty demanded its moment, it wasn't wealth or violence that answered. It was discipline. It was honor. It was a 14-year-old girl who knew her father's code and a 10-year-old boy who found his voice. Together, they taught an elite academy, a crime boss, and millions watching online the most important lesson: true strength doesn't come from what you can take or destroy. It comes from who you protect when no one's watching and how you stand when everything tells you to fall. So, are you crying? Because I am. And if you felt even a fraction of what I felt writing this, if this story changed something in you, even for a moment, then you understand why I need you to do something. Share this. Not for me. For the person in your life who needs to be reminded that love is worth fighting for. That sacrifice means something. That even in darkness, we can choose to be light. And if you're not subscribed yet, after everything we just went through together, I honestly don't know what to tell you. Maybe you're numb. Maybe you're scared to feel too much. But I hope you come back. Because we're building something here. A place where stories like this live. Where emotions aren't edited out for comfort. Where we remember what it means to be human. Subscribe. Turn on notifications. And if you want, leave a comment and tell me, what moment destroyed you? What line will you remember forever? Let's process this together. Thank you for trusting me with your time. Thank you for feeling. And thank you for being here. This is Black Stories, where the invisible become undeniable and courage reshapes everything. If this moved you, share it for every child told they're not enough, every parent working night shifts to raise warriors, every soul who chose discipline over destruction. Subscribe, because we tell the stories where the underestimated don't just rise, they redefine what power really means. Until the next story, stay human.